Okay, let's try this for the third fucking time. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, so I don't know how long we were having connectivity issues in the other one. So, I'm just gonna start at question 4 here, and then I will loop back around to the other questions so we don't bore everybody who was here for the first 15 minutes of the other one. Anyways, yeah, this is great. I'm really good at technology, just so y'all know. Okay, hold on. And let me open YouTube back up on my phone so I can see if y'all are here. I am bad at technology. Yum yum. And we won't try playing. Okay, there are apparently 6 of you here. There are 8 of you here. Hello again. Yes, hopefully it works. I'm so sorry. I'm bad at technology. It's okay. The reason it took so long was because I was trying to remember how to do this again. It shouldn't be so hard, but it is. I am just not very good at doing technology. Okay, but anyways, so what I said earlier, I don't know if y'all heard, is I'm just going to skip the first 3 questions and then start at the 4th, and then at the end I'll loop back around so it's all contained in one stream. And I avoid boring all of y'all. All right. Okay, so anyway, we're going to start at question 4, which was if you were told to make a thesis and write a paper about BML, what would you write about? Oh man, I would write about a lot of things, but I think I feel like what this is getting at is like what's the most important theme, like to me personally. And there's like a lot of stuff that's discussed in BML, but I think honestly the most important thing to me would be the importance of not necessarily forgiving yourself, but that skill of realizing that you cannot do anything to change the past, and so you just have to move forward. Like there are a bunch of moments in the later chapters where Jimin's like, I can't do anything about what happened before. I can't change what I did. I can't change what Yoongi did. I can't change how any of that was done. But what I can do is try to do my best in the moment. And that's that's a really, really, really hard thing to do, I think. I think personally, I think part of being a person is wishing that the past went differently. I can't remember what the exactly the topic was, but I remember I took an abnormal psychology class a couple years back, and one of the things they talked about was like how human beings are some of the only creatures that worry extensively about the past and the future as far as we're aware. And I think that's something that's just very hard to overcome, wishing that something had gone differently, but realizing that you can't change it and that all you can do is try your best in the moment and accepting that sometimes even your best isn't necessarily going to be good enough for whatever you're trying to do. That's a really hard thing. Um, and I think the way that I portrayed Jimin doing that in later chapters is maybe a little bit optimistic, but I like hopeful fiction. So question 5 is what's the one thing that you really, really want people to take away from the story that might not be obvious? I think that last thing I said is definitely like the number one takeaway I want people to have. But something that's a little less obvious. Let me think, because I think I established that theme of pretty explicitly um, later on. I guess I would say I think it's important to acknowledge this is one of my very big things in terms of like how I interact with people and how I talk to others, but trying to actually analyze what harm you're doing. if that makes any sense. Because I think a lot of Jungi's hang up in the beginning of the fic is that he's like, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. Like what he wants sexually is just very, very bad, and he hates himself for it a lot. And but he still does it. He does it anyways. And I think that trying to be true to yourself while also minimizing harm is something that I think is very, very, very important. Um, I think actually a really good example of that theme in a little more broad sense is humor. So while some things can be really, really, really funny, it might not necessarily be a good idea to share them in a broader context because it can be very easily misconstrued or viewed by people who don't necessarily think it's funny, I suppose, and it's actually like very hurtful emotionally to them. So that's something I think about a lot. But trying to analyze the harm that something actually does, and I think the other side of it, because Jungi's whole thing is he should analyze the harm that it actually does and find ways to minimize harm, which would have been to find people who are actually into BDSM. But I think that sort of the other side of that coin is I just completely lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. But the other side of that is what was I gonna say that it was? Shit. I've had a really long week, y'all. Oh man, I have like 4 group projects all due in the next 2 weeks, and I feel like my brain is about to like fucking explode. Oh yes, but thinking about like what harm your actions have, even if they're not necessarily intended, that's something I'm very big on. Like, when you say something and someone reads a message and somebody's like, "Oh, I interpreted it this way," or like this could mean this, or people who are like this are also going to see this, it's very public. Um, and I think it's very easy to be like, well, obviously it's not meant in that way, but regardless of what you meant, like it's like the whole idea that intention doesn't matter, and what like the actual effect on other people is what matters. And I think that's something I touch on a little bit in BML that I think is something that's important to me emotionally. Okay, so let's move on to number 6. You say this fic helped you through your own breakup stuff. Would you be willing to talk about what you've taken away from this fic and how it helped you grow in regards to that? And if the fic was a byproduct of things that have been in your brain for a long time because of that breakup, or if it was relatively new? Were you Jimin in the Hosuk and Jimin relationship, and is here a representation of yourself? Um, so I would say this fic is definitely the byproduct of things that have been in my brain for a really long time. I don't necessarily mind talking about that particular breakup. There are some other things that are like personally relevant to me and this fic that I have very explicitly decided not to talk about. Um, I decided when I first started writing it that I wasn't going to talk about those things. So I won't talk about those things, but I'm fine talking about this breakup. I was actually on Twitter when it happened. I think I just gotten on Twitter. I remember I'd like just met Mia. But I had a girlfriend when I was about 19. We moved in together and she dumped me 2 weeks later. And at the time, I think we'd started dating in high school, and then we dated all through our freshman year of college, and this was the very beginning of my sophomore year. So we'd been dating for nearly 2 years. Um, at that point, it was a little less. But yeah, that was before that was really my first long-term relationship at all ever. Um, and it was my first really serious relationship with a woman. And so that was like a whole other thing emotionally. I think I've talked about it a couple times before on Twitter, but historically my relationships with men have tended to be a lot more shallow feelings wise. Not that it's necessarily a bad thing. I just don't form attachments as easily or as deeply to men as I tend to with women. And I've talked about that before. So having a breakup with a woman was kind of a lot for me. But after she dumped me, after we'd moved in, um, we're both broke college students, and she decides that she's gonna camp out in our living room for like 2 months and then get really mad when I ask, like, hey, can you move somewhere else? So that was a lot. There was a lot of things I had to realize about that relationship in like the months after it happened. I think that the thing that um I kind of that was very difficult for me to come to terms with was the idea that the relationship really hadn't been good for a long time and that I hadn't been happy and that even if I was upset that it ended, it was probably the better decision, and I think she was right. So I was yeah, ironically enough, I think I was the hussuck in that situation. Um, and yeah, I've talked to her, like, once afterwards. I think she's in, like, graduate school in Maryland or something now, I don't fucking know. But oh, hello. Mwah, nice to have you here. Weird thing to walk into in the middle of, sorry. Um, but, yeah, realizing that you're not happy is also a skill, I think. I was definitely the kind of person who was just like, "This is working, and she's still here, so clearly she wants to work on it, so we should work on it." I'm very much that kind of person, and I've grown to be less that way. I've gotten a lot better at cutting people out of my life who neither of us are better for the fact that we're in each other's lives. That's a skill. That's a very difficult skill to develop, I think. Um, yeah, and I think moving past like again, I talked about it earlier in the other stream that I fucked up. But realizing that you can't change the past, but all you can do is try to do your best now. That's really hard. Um, And I think that those are life skills that I began to gain around that point in my life, which is a couple years ago now. But yeah. So that's what I would say. That's how I would say my life is relevant to this fic. Common themes. Okay. So I guess we'll move on to question 7. In chapter 19, Jimin says, I love you to Yoongi when he's leaving his apartment, and Yoongi responds, I like you a lot. In later chapters, Jimin also says, I like you a lot. Does Jimin love Yoongi, or does he feel that they have a lot of learning slash growing to do before reaching that point? Um, complicated question. The reason I didn't want to have the fic end with Yoongi being like, yeah, I love you, and Jimin being like, I love you back, is I think that when Jimin originally said it, he didn't say it because he wanted to say it. I think he said it more because he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't. He wanted the situation to be better and he felt like that would make it better. Um, and I think that when you say things like that, when you're talking to other people about your emotions, you shouldn't say it because you want the other person to feel better or you want to like salvage something. You should say it because it's true. And I think Jimin still had some thinking to do in terms of like whether that was true or not. Um yeah, so I think that's basically where I wanted to leave it. And I think Yoongi sort of knew that. I'm not entirely sure how much he knew of that exactly, but I think that yeah, yeah, I think there are also some aspects of maybe not necessarily wanting to get really attached to someone who you think is just going to walk out, or you think, you know, like we can put a lot of effort into this, but it might not work out in the end. And I don't think Yoongi was emotionally ready to say I love you. Like I don't think he was there yet. I think the difference between feeling and expression, I think, is also important in that regard. Like, did Yoongi feel like he loved Jim? And I don't know. I didn't write it from his perspective. I wasn't like keeping track of his emotional developments quite as closely as Jimin's. And I think it's better as a story if you read it where you aren't quite sure what's going on in his head. You just know what's going on in Jimin's. So I tried to write it like that also. Um, But Yoongi, like regardless, Yoongi definitely wasn't ready to express it. And I think, yeah, that's what I think. Oh, somebody said Donald Trump said, you know what else is difficult? Winning the presidential election on the first try. Okay. Thanks, Donald Trump. That's a little strange. Okay. Question 8. Did you ever come across a scene oh, fuck. Did you ever come across a scene you felt you couldn't properly explain in words, like you saw it in your head, but had trouble actually typing it out? Hell yeah! That's all writing is. No, that's a little unfair. Um, there were a lot of scenes towards the end, especially that I had like I could envision them in my mind's eye, and I could go, "Oh man, like Yuki's gonna say this, and then Jimin's gonna say this, and they're gonna do this, and blah blah." And then you like sit down and you actually write it, and you're like, "Shit, that's not gonna work. Like it needs to be more complex than that. It needs to be more. It needs more." That was, I think, really frustrating. And there were also some scenes towards the end where I got there, and I kept like building them up and building them up and building them up and being like, yes, this is gonna be like a big scene, like especially the one where Jimin talks to Hosuk. And like I had all these things in mind that like, oh yeah, Jimin's gonna say this and Hosuk's gonna say this, and yeah, like this is gonna happen. And then you actually sit down and you're like you get, you finish the chapter right before it, and you're like, that's not gonna work. The scene between Jimin and Hosuk definitely ended up being much more minimal than I originally thought it was going to be. And to be completely honest, I think it's better for that. I don't think that the two of them having like an epically long conversation, where they like go over all the details of their relationship and how exactly like, oh, well, you said this one time, and like I didn't think that would be helpful. I don't think that would be fun to read either, but I think that the emotional clarity that they both got from that relatively brief conversation was very, very, very valuable. Um, but yeah, some scenes that ended up expanding were I remember the scene. For one thing, I didn't originally plan for Jimin to like call his mom and talk to his family, but I think I brought that theme up a lot, and it was important to like give it a little bit of closure. And so that scene the morning after he stays the night at Yoongi's house, later on in the fic, that one ended up expanding a lot. That last sex scene. So basically, that last sex scene and the scene where Jimin and Yoongi talk about kinks, were originally meant to be like one thing, and then I think they got split up into like three. I don't know. It was a disaster. When I got to the end of this book, I was like, yeah, I know exactly what's gonna happen. And then I actually started writing it. I was like, shit. Fuck. Okay. So for chapter 9, or not chapter 9, question 9, did you know this story was heading this way when you started it? Did you know where it was going to end? Slash how much of BML was planned from the beginning, and what kinds of things changed as you wrote? Oh man. I basically had the whole thing planned out from the beginning. Okay, are we back? Yeah, we're back. Okay, hello. I'm not a complete failure, I promise. Hopefully that's the last time that happens. I'm so sorry. Jesus Christ. Okay. So we're back. Okay, the question was how I think, yeah, sound. It's great. I think hopefully I can go in and edit the final version, and so the downtime just isn't there. Disaster, man. Okay. But the question was, how did you know the story was heading the way, or did you know the story was heading this way when you started? The answer is yes. I had the whole thing planned out for the most part. I think the first scene that I ever imagined, I actually tweeted about it. I don't know if I went back and deleted the tweets at some point. I do that sometimes because I'm a piece of shit. I'm like, oh, I thought of something and I want to share it, and then like 3 days later, I'm like, oh, I don't want people to know this about this story. Um, but the first scene I think I ever imagined was the party scene, where Jimin and Yoongi are at a party, and Jimin's all like, "Oh man, this is gonna be so great! I'm so excited for this." And Yoongi is just a fucking disaster alcoholic man the whole time. Um, So yeah, basically the whole thing. As I went, I sort of added some scenes, like I mentioned before. The scene where Jimin calls his mom was never something that really that I thought of. A lot of the scenes in the beginning also. I had a basic outline. I sort of had like the beginning, the middle, the end. Where the middle was like the least fleshed out. I'd say probably chapters like 3 to 10-ish were the least planned, and I just kind of wrote what I felt like would make sense and sort of began exploring a lot of different themes. Um but other than that, like all the stuff at the end was planned out. Most of the high like plot points were planned out. Um So yeah, a lot of the stuff also I originally planned out is like, oh, Yoongi does this and it makes Jimin feel X or whatever. Like that was the original outline, and as I wrote, I got to come up with exactly what those things would be. That's how I write a lot of my fics, honestly. But yeah. Oh, and what kind of things changed as I wrote? I think I already mentioned some things in the previous question, but basically a lot of like the fine details and stuff. Not anything super major, I don't think. Mostly it was there are some original plot points I think that are in the beginning of it that I never really got to explore, just because of the way that time works, or like how much I was willing to write. Like I know there's this one scene where Jimin gets groped on the bus, and like that was supposed to be the whole beginning to like this exploration of like sexual things you want and sexual things you don't want, like a basic exploration of consent. And I never, that really did not get pulled through. So now that that scene is just there and it like makes no sense, but it's fine. Um, yeah, it's wild, man. Will the first part of the broadcast before you had to reconnect still be available? If you mean the one that I do where I answer the first four questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop back around and answer those questions again. So it's all in one thing, hopefully. Um, and I will hopefully give basically the same answers. Um, so no, it won't be, but I'll answer the questions again. Regarding Yoonmin, do you imagine them to stay together? I'm soft, yes. Definitely. I definitely want them to stay together. But I think the reason I decided to end the fic the way that I did was more so about like accepting and acknowledging that things can go wrong and they can fail and you can just not be the right people for each other, and like that's okay. Like I think fan fiction especially has this tendency to it's all very fairy tale and very like, oh, everything's great now. It's magic, and they're happy. They're like, it's like the happily ever after thing. And that's not bad. I don't think that's bad at all. But for this fic, like the original concept behind it was basically like a deconstruction of a lot of sugar daddy tropes where you kind of take, and I wanted to take them and make them a little more realistic and a little more in depth and a little more meaningful. Um, and so I don't think like a fairy tale ending on like stuck on the end of this would have made sense emotionally, even if like I wanted, you know what I mean? But yeah, I do imagine that they'd stay together. Um, as someone who's currently dealing with two ex-alcoholics and seeing them struggle with wanting to drink and the change in their personalities, less forgetting actually doing things, also just eating instead of drinking and putting on weight. I was wondering how and if Yoongi struggles, and how he and Jimin deal with it and what it looks like in the long run. I don't think I could answer that like as fully as I would like, because I think a lot of that would be extending their characters like far beyond the story, which I will freely admit I haven't done. In a lot of ways, BML itself, like just taking on like the huge chunk of their lives that was, BML is kind of a lot. And there are some fics I have where I have like really extensive like imagines outside of what the actual text is, but I don't have it as much for this. Um, but yeah, I think honestly, like I think you like dealing with Yoongi's alcohol problem would be incredibly hard, and I think it would probably be one of like the main issues in their relationship. I always kind of imagined that Yoongi would probably try going to a rehab facility, but I don't think he would do it like especially soon after the fic ended. I think it would take some time for him to like emotionally get ready for that. And I think the therapy would probably help a lot. Um, but yeah, I Yoongi also has money, and so that makes a lot of his problems a little bit easier. But I always imagined Yoongi and Jimin probably dating for like a year, Yoongi going to rehab, and the two of them moving in together after that. Because there are a lot of studies actually, psychology, that indicates that getting over addictions is a lot easier when you're drastically changing your environment. So I think something like that would probably be really good for him. Um, and that's what I think about. But I think there's an emotional struggle there. And I think Jimin would probably have a similar emotional struggle. He definitely had not as much of an alcohol problem as Yoongi, but he definitely like didn't have a super healthy relationship with alcohol. And you see that a lot in people around my age, people who are just fresh out of college, where like substances become the way to drown out your own problems. Um, and like a way to deal with sadness and a way to deal with, the fact that things have not gone your way because using mind altering substances makes things a little bit easier. And I think that would be a struggle for both of them for a really long time. But I think seeing Yoongi probably makes Jimin want to be a lot better. And I would hope that having Jimin in his life would also make Yoongi want to be better. I think that's one of the hardest things, honestly, is like wanting to be better, wanting to move past that part of your life and realizing how you have to do it. Like that you, I mean, not necessarily realizing how you have to do it, but realizing that all the things that you're going to have to do to get past it are going to be horrible. And really, addiction is kind of a lifelong thing. Like once you've hit that point, it's all about like thinking back to my goddamn abnormal psych class again, but basically substances and the way that your brain responds to them, it like irrevocably like changes your brain chemistry over time. And I think especially when you have a really unhealthy emotional relationship with substances, like you can be doing really, really, really good for like weeks or months or years, and then like one bad thing happens, and I don't know. I think it's just developing the emotional skills to cope with bad things is something that you would have to work. You would have to work really hard on. Um, but yeah, I suppose that's my answer to that question. Um, that was a big ramble. I'm so sorry. I hope that was adequate though. So for number 12 was regarding the BTS characters. It's rare to see writers go the route of not having all the boys be friends and stuff. Why did you decide to have Seokjin and Hoseok be former love interests? Well, I'm gonna be real with you. Hoseok and Seokjin are two of the characters that are the most difficult for me to write, I think. Um, in terms of their stage personas, they're definitely two of the most guarded members, I think. And they both changed a lot over the years. It's actually, I think, one of my favorite observations about Seokjin, like as a person, is that I think he's pretty awkward. Like, especially in the first couple years, he really only started doing like the very like, oh, like the dad jokes and the very over the top stuff. Like a couple years after they debuted, right around when I got into them, that sort of like became his shtick. And I think he does genuinely like that shtick. But like beforehand, he's like really awkward in a lot of situations, especially like their very early stuff. Um, and he doesn't, I just don't think Hoseok and Seokjin let us see as much of who they are as people. I remember every once in a while, especially during like Bon Voyage and Burn the Stage and shows like that, every once in a while you get like a glimpse of like Hoseok, like not the stage persona, and you're just like, whoa! Same as the first. Yeah, this is my home Wi-Fi. There is no better Wi-Fi I have access to. But it's kind of weird. Just uploaded a video, or I just recorded a video instead of doing this, but it's okay. We started. We're gonna fucking finish it. It's fine. Okay, so we're here. Hold on. Everybody, back streets, back highway. Okay, anyways. Why did I in section be love interests? Yeah, we're back. What I was thinking was, they're harder for me to write, basically. And it's easier to have them play minor roles when I struggle to write them. And especially writing from their perspective is still written from such an our house perspective, so eh, our limits. Also, like, I'm gonna make Jimin is like my favorite character. Um, back. Okay. I'm gonna fucking die. Jesus Christ. Okay. Um, but uh oh man, okay. Let's try this one more time. Just sitting here desperately trying not to show y'all my Wi-Fi. Um, okay, can y'all hear me? Oh, hold on. There we go. I think it's just a lag. Okay. All right. Rockin'. Okay. Um, does BML Yoongi like worms? Yes. Yes, he does. That's canon. You can be assured of that. Okay. So, what I was gonna say is when you're getting this deep into what do you call it? RPF, a certain amount of it is just really liking so and so's face. And liking writing about someone who has their face. Oh, so thank you. I hope it just works. I really hope it just works. Yes, he's Worm Boy. I love him. Okay. How would BML Yoongi react to the boys, Jim and Cook telling him that they like how he says their names and how it makes them feel? Okay, honestly, listen. Yoongi is definitely one of those people who just very much enjoys like feeling like he's taking care of other people. So I think that would make him really happy. I feel like I don't know. I feel like that would make him really happy. Um, yeah, I don't know. Um, somebody says, lovely cannoli says he squirm. Thank you. 14. After the epilogue of BML years later, where do you see Dimon and Yuki? I talked about that a little bit, so I'll skim over that. But in general, I wouldn't want to give it like a certain, like definite thing. I would hope that they stay together personally because I like them and I want them to be happy. I'm a soft boy. What originally inspired me to write BML? I think if I remember correctly, it was really like I wanted to write a sugar daddy AU, but I wanted it to be a little more realistic, not to like take a shit on sugar daddy AUs or anything like that. They're fun, definitely. But I've always like there's always something about like reading one, especially where it's just like, oh, so and so meets sugar daddy and lots of money and like the one who's not like the sugar baby just has a kink for getting all that money and blah, blah, blah. Like it always feels it's not shallow. I'm sure there are people who are like very much into that kink wise, and I get it. I definitely get it. But I kind of wanted to write something that I think would be like a little more emotionally serious and kind of take some of the like also the thing that always gets me is when there's like sugar daddy gay use and they like contrast like these really like emotional behaviors with like but like kinky stress and it was stress and it's like yeah sugar daddy's like an alcoholic. Oh no. And I wanted to do some little serious. Let's say realistic. Ah, is it back? Oh my god. What if I just ignore all the connectivity problems and just keep fucking talking? Okay, I think it's up. This is gonna be a horrible video to watch in replay. I'm so fucking sorry. I think we're almost at the end. And it stopped again. Uh, can y'all hear my voice or is it just completely down? I can't tell. Okay, I'm just gonna keep talking. I'm so tired. I can't do it. If asked directly by someone close to him, would BML Yoongi be able to recognize an alcohol problem, and would you, as a writer, say he's an alcoholic? I think he would probably say it. I thought about this one a lot, actually. It was an interesting question, but I think he would say that he was an alcoholic. Okay, you can hear me. It just cuts out a lot. Okay. Um, I think he definitely would say he's an alcoholic. Namjoon. I don't know if he would say it to Jimin. Like asked directly and like using those words. I think he would probably admit that he has a problem, but I don't think that he would admit that he's an okay. And 17. How would you hypotheticals were so hopeful and I was thinking things will end up working out for them and suddenly my mind went wedding. I think it would be a lot time, like 10 years if ever, but they would be so happy. Most importantly, though, thank you for BML saying I loved it. Feels like too little. It meant a lot to me. Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad it meant so much to you. It was a really important fic for me to write. Um, I don't think it would take them 10 years to get married. And that's maybe I would say more like 5 probably. Something along those lines. I don't know what their wedding would be like. I never really thought about it. Sometimes I like to think about them being old and married, though. I don't usually think of people having weddings. I think about them being old and married. So 18, did you always intend for BML to go like this? Or did you come up with some of it later? For the most part, I inserted or altered as I went along. Any BML head canons for the future? Mm. Oh, I kind of already talked about you going to rehab. I definitely did that. Um, wait, hold on. Is it down? I can't tell. I can't tell if it's okay. It's not. Going to rehab. I would say that's like a major canon. I hope he goes to rehab. He needs it. Any kinks you wish? For the most part, no. I think I kind of hit all you. Uh, I had so much more bravado when I was like 19 out loud. Can't do that now. But the scene where he was talking about some of the things that they talked about during where they talk about kink and negotiate, and that's great. There were a lot of people who asked after that sort of stuff, the stuff they talked about there. And like, oh, are you gonna write something like that? Would they ever do it in real life? I don't know. Maybe. I don't think Jungi. I think something important to keep in mind is like the emotional dissonance between like a fantasy and like reality. So like the kinds of things that you would be emotionally okay with having like in a fantasy, you're like, oh, this is hot to think about, and then like the reality of actually doing those things, I probably has a pretty big gap for those things. And I think while to work up to doing like a lot more serious, like heavy things. So all right, so 21, what are your thoughts on the morality of Tay's behavior as a best friend? This is a good question. So for the most part, I think really there's no easy answer to like what a friend should do in that situation. I don't really think Tay is like immoral in any sense. I really think he's best. And I think it's sort of the worry of not necessarily being able to like, oh shit, I made this mistake once. Like, how can I let it happen again? That sort of thing. Um, necessarily, I don't think it's either like moral or immoral. It's just a thing that I don't think it's wrong for friends to be like, hey, you're doing this thing and it's worrying me. I think maybe putting his foot down and being like, I'm not even going to meet your boyfriend might be like a little much, especially considering how Jimin had clearly been trying to like actually improve um during that part of the fic. But again, I think he's just trying to do what's right and he's trying to do something that's like good for Jimin, you know? Um, but yeah, so I guess that's what I think about that. I don't think it's necessarily like, I don't think it's something you can pass like a moral are okay to say, as far as I remember. Admittedly, a lot of like the minutiae have been blasted out of my brain. Last couple weeks of school, which has been so bad. I don't want to talk about it. They're awful. Um, okay, so 22 is, do you headcanon that Tay and Jimin tried dating at one point and it just didn't? No. Tay's like ace. I kind of imagine him as the kind of person who's been super interested in romance. Um, just deeply worried about Jimin because he seems to make pretty bad decisions. So, yeah, that's what I would say. 23 is who's sucked and married to. Isn't relevant to the story, so it doesn't matter. Some guy, maybe another real estate agent. Um, what happens to Husuk? He gets his master's in some kind of dance thing, and I hope he becomes a professor because I think he'd do good at that. In addition, do he and Jimin ever become friends again? I don't really know about that. Um, I think that being someone for 3 years and then dumping them with like nothing really in terms of explanation. I feel that that was like a really hard time for Hosok emotionally. And I think that being friends with Jimin wouldn't be super high on his and I think honestly, I think he would just remind like being friends with him for I think that would just remind Jimin of a bunch of shit that he doesn't want to think about. I don't know, so I don't know if they necessarily become them though. So they'll like hear about each other's lives every once in a while. Okay. And I'm gonna go over these first four questions. Can you talk a little bit more about Sukjin's life in New York and the idea that Yoongi became an alcoholic because he left and not the other way? What I originally said to this was that I don't really fair to say that Yoongi became an alcoholic because Sukjin left. I think and going through all that stuff with Lenny and then his dad not coming to his wedding and then is dead, if I'm gonna be real. Like having a fight with one of my family members and then dying immediately afterwards, like that's finished like that, where you can't fix it and you can't go back. I think it's rough. And I think that like you can be shut down emotionally a little bit. Yeah. That's more the reason. And he probably always had an issue. I think Namjoon mentions that at some point, that he always had at least. I imagined that he got married to agent. I never really thought about it. It's not super relevant. What happens to Hoseok and Jungkook? I talked about that a little bit. Namjoon ever repair their relationship? Definitely. Most of these are sort of dumb, but I love to can't. Is that dumb? Don't worry about it. But Yoongi and Namjoon definitely repair their relationship. I think that when you have people that have been in your life for a really long time, you're in that effort to like repair your. I mean, and I don't think they're really all that far off. I'm not sure. Yoongi says he's not sure if Namjoon likes him anymore. I would probably agree with him. I'm not sure he likes him as a person very much either, but Namjoon does love him like a lot. And I think that's important. Are there any other sex scenes that you considered including that didn't end up that you didn't end up writing for the fic? Um, I originally wanted to have a scene where they talk about kink, and that just like devolves into a sex scene. That didn't know. It was like too emotionally heavy. It didn't work. But I think that would have been fun. I wanted to have them like I don't know, like hand jobs and dirty talk in the living room. I thought that would have been fun, but that didn't happen. And four, if you were told to make a thesis and write a paper about BML, what would you write about? Um, I can't remember if I answered this one at the beginning of the question. It doesn't matter. I'll just say it again. But I think like the most major theme that I would want people to like is the importance, not necessarily of forgiving yourself, but of realizing that in the moment you can't fix what happened in the past. Like that's a very human thing to wish you'd done better and to wish that something hadn't happened, but it did. And I think that acknowledging like, okay, that thing happened and now I just have to deal with it and I have to move on and I have to figure out how in the moment is I think a really important life skill that I am still constantly developing. I'm really bad about it actually. It's like one of my major like personality things. I think I spend a lot of time wishing things had gone better. Um, but I think what's important is accepting the negatives of, of what's happening right now and then just moving on. Yeah. And I think that the way I write Jim and doing that in the last few chapters is like very ambitious, but I like hope. Sorry for the connectivity problems. Don't know why. My internet's been fine for a while, or at least it hasn't been going down every 10 minutes. So, so this is watchable. If it's not, um, but yeah, thank y'all so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and listen to me ramble about this. And I hope it was enjoyable for you. I hope you liked some of the answers to these questions. Hopefully they weren't just boring me being like, I don't know. Okay. But about it. So but thank you for coming, lovelies. I appreciate y'all. And I will see y'all. Yes, I will re-upload it. Don't worry about that. Or I will at least do my best. I'll take it at air. Torture to listen to. Yeah. Okay. But anyways, Twitter.